The moment my father looked me in the eye and said, "We've made our decision," I already knew what was coming. He didn't even hesitate. "The lake house belongs to your sister." I looked across the dining room table. Emily smiled without saying a word. She didn't look surprised. She looked prepared, like this conversation had happened before I walked through the front door. I slowly put my fork down. "What about Grandpa's will?" Dad shrugged. "It doesn't matter. We've already handled everything." My heart started racing. Handled everything? Grandpa had been gone for only 5 days. The will hadn't even been read yet. Mom reached across the table. "Honey, don't make this difficult." I laughed. Not because anything was funny, because it was the only thing keeping me from crying. For 30 years, every important decision in our family somehow ended with Emily getting exactly what she wanted. This was just another chapter, or so I thought. 3 weeks later, Grandpa's lawyer opened one final envelope, and my parents' faces turned completely white. "My name is Olivia Carter. I'm 31 years old. I grew up in a small town outside Denver, Colorado. My parents always insisted they loved both of their daughters equally, but actions tell the truth better than words. Emily was only 18 months older than me, yet somehow, she was always the favorite. When we were kids, she picked the restaurant. She chose the family vacations. She got the bigger bedroom. If she broke something, it was an accident. If I broke something, you need to be more responsible." At first, I thought every family was like that. Then I started visiting my friends' houses. That's when I realized something wasn't normal. Parents weren't supposed to compare their children every single day, but mine did, every single day. Emily wasn't a bad person when we were little. We actually shared secrets, built blanket forts, stayed awake talking until midnight. Everything changed after high school. She realized my parents would always protect her. Once she understood that, she stopped hiding who she really was. If she wanted my clothes, she took them. If she wanted my birthday money, Mom called it sharing. If she borrowed my car and returned it empty, Dad handed her gas money. I wasn't just expected to forgive her. I was expected to apologize for being upset. Grandpa noticed. He never said much in front of everyone, but every Sunday afternoon he'd invite me fishing. Those trips weren't really about fishing. They were about escaping. One afternoon he asked, "Does it bother you?" I looked at the water. "What?" "The way your parents treat you." I forced a smile. "I'm used to it." Grandpa shook his head. "You should never get used to being treated like you're worth less." Those words stayed with me, because nobody had ever said them before. After college, I moved to Denver. I found a job as a project coordinator for a construction company. It wasn't glamorous, but I loved solving problems. Within 6 years, I became operations manager. I bought a small townhouse, paid off my student loans, built a quiet life. Meanwhile, Emily bounced from one expensive hobby to another. Boutique, photography studio, event planning. Each business lasted a few months. Each failure ended the same way. Dad wrote another check. Mom called it helping her get back on her feet. I wondered what it felt like to have people believe in you that much. Then Grandpa got sick. Cancer. Fast. Aggressive. I visited every weekend, sometimes after 10-hour workdays, sometimes during snowstorms, sometimes just to sit beside him while he slept. Emily came twice. Both visits lasted less than 30 minutes. She always had somewhere else to be. One afternoon, Grandpa squeezed my hand. "You know why I like when you visit?" I smiled. "Because I bring your favorite pie?" He laughed softly. "No. You never look at your watch." I looked away before he could see my eyes filling with tears. 2 weeks before he passed away, Grandpa asked everyone to leave his room, everyone except me. He reached into the drawer beside his bed. Inside was an old photograph. It showed him standing beside the lake house nearly 40 years earlier. "I built this place with my own hands." "I know." He nodded. "I need you to promise me something." Anything. When the time comes. Don't let anyone pressure you. I frowned. What do you mean? He smiled. You'll understand. Before I could ask another question, a nurse walked into the room. That was the last private conversation we ever had. The funeral was beautiful. More than 200 people came. Old co-workers, neighbors, fishing buddies, people I'd never met. Everyone had a story about Grandpa. Everyone except Emily. She spent most of the reception asking relatives if anyone knew how much the lake house was worth now. I heard her. So did Grandpa's oldest friend. He quietly looked at me and sighed. Some people see memories. Others only see property. I wished he was wrong. He wasn't. 5 days later, my parents invited everyone over for dinner. Dad stood up holding a glass. I've spoken with Emily. We've decided she'll be taking over the lake house. I stared at him. The will hasn't even been read. Dad smiled confidently. It won't matter. Trust me. Emily reached across the table and squeezed Mom's hand. I'll take good care of it. Nobody asked what Grandpa wanted. Nobody mentioned the attorney. Nobody mentioned the will. It was as if they had already decided Grandpa's wishes didn't matter. I stood up. I don't think that's how this works. Dad's face immediately hardened. It does in this family. The room fell silent. I grabbed my coat and walked toward the door. Just before I left, my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. Hello? A calm voice spoke. Ms. Carter? This is Benjamin Harris. I'm your grandfather's attorney. I need you to come to my office tomorrow morning. There is something your family doesn't know. I stopped walking. What is it? There was a long pause. Then he quietly said, Your grandfather left instructions. For one final envelope to be opened only if your parents tried to ignore his wishes. My hand tightened around the phone. Across the room, my parents were laughing with Emily. None of them had any idea that Grandpa had seen this coming. I didn't sleep that night. I kept replaying the attorney's words. Your grandfather left instructions for one final envelope to be opened only if your parents tried to ignore his wishes. Why would Grandpa expect something like that? More importantly, what was inside that envelope? The next morning, I arrived at Benjamin Harris's law office 15 minutes early. It was an old brick building downtown. Nothing fancy. The receptionist smiled politely. Ms. Carter? Mr. Harris is expecting you. As I followed her down the hallway, my heart pounded harder with every step. Benjamin Harris looked exactly how I remembered him. Gray suit, silver hair, calm eyes. He stood up and shook my hand. I'm sorry for your loss. Thank you. He motioned for me to sit. Then he placed a thick folder on the desk. I've represented your grandfather for 27 years. He trusted very few people. But he trusted you. I felt tears forming again. I just visited him. Benjamin smiled. You did much more than visit. He told me everything. I frowned. What do you mean? He opened the folder. Every month for the last 4 years, your grandfather came here. He updated his estate plan several times. He always asked me one question. If my family ignores my wishes, can you still protect them? I stared at him. He knew? Benjamin nodded slowly. He hoped he was wrong. He reached into a locked drawer. Inside was a large cream-colored envelope. Across the front, written in Grandpa's handwriting, were the words, "Open only if they choose Emily again." My hands began to shake. Benjamin carefully handed it to me. Your grandfather instructed me to let you read this first. I slowly opened the seal. The letter began. Olivia, if you're reading this, then your parents learned nothing. A tear rolled down my cheek. I spent years watching them compare you to Emily. Every time you succeeded, they celebrated her instead. Every time she failed, they rescued her. You never complained. But I noticed. I couldn't hold back anymore. I cried silently while Benjamin looked away, giving me privacy. The letter continued. You visited because you loved me. Emily visited because she wanted to know who would get the lake house. Those words hurt because they were true. Benjamin handed me another document. This is the final version of your grandfather's will. I looked at the first page, then the second. Everything looked normal. Until I reached the section about the lake house. I froze. It didn't belong to Emily. It didn't belong to my parents. Grandpa had left it. To me. I looked up in disbelief. There has to be some mistake. Benjamin smiled gently. There isn't. He wanted the person who valued memories more than money to own it. I whispered, my parents already promised it to Emily. I know. Benjamin folded his hands. That's why they haven't scheduled the official reading. They've been calling my office every day. What are they asking? They want me to skip certain documents. I stared at him. They actually asked that? He nodded. They offered to pay me. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They even suggested that your grandfather wasn't thinking clearly during his final weeks. I felt sick. Grandpa had remained sharp until the very end. They knew that. Benjamin continued. When I refused, they hired another attorney to challenge the will. I leaned back in my chair. So what happens now? Benjamin opened another folder. There is one more document. My stomach tightened. What kind? A trust agreement. He placed it in front of me. This changes everything. I quickly read the first page, then the second. Then I stopped. The trust owned more than the lake house. It included Grandpa's investment account, his workshop, his fishing boat, several acres of land beside the lake, nearly everything. And according to the document, I had been named the trustee. Benjamin quietly explained, nothing can be sold. Nothing can be transferred. Nothing can be borrowed against without your written approval. I looked at him. So Emily can't move into the lake house? No. And your parents can't sell it? No. They also can't use it as collateral for loans. Suddenly, I understood why Dad had sounded so confident at dinner. He didn't know this document existed. Benjamin stood and walked toward the window. There's something else. I almost laughed. Every 5 minutes there seemed to be another surprise. What now? He looked at me seriously. Yesterday afternoon, your father called. What did he want? He demanded copies of every estate document. And? I refused. What did he say? Benjamin hesitated. He told me, Olivia will sign whatever we put in front of her. I slowly shook my head. No, she won't. Benjamin smiled. I told him the same thing. As I prepared to leave, Benjamin handed me a small leather notebook. Your grandfather wanted you to have this. It was his journal. You don't have to read it today. But someday, you should. I slipped it into my bag. Before opening the office door, Benjamin stopped me. Olivia, I turned. The official will reading is Friday. Your family has no idea about the final envelope. I nodded. Should I tell them? He smiled. No. Let them keep believing they've already won. Friday morning arrived. The conference room was already full when I walked in. Mom and Dad sat beside Emily. Emily wore a bright smile. She looked like someone about to celebrate. When she saw me, she smirked. I hope you're not expecting much. Dad quietly added, this won't take long. Benjamin entered carrying 3 folders and 1 sealed cream-colored envelope. The exact same envelope I had opened 2 days earlier, except this one had a red wax seal. Everyone stared at it. Emily frowned. What's that? Benjamin placed it carefully in the center of the table. He looked around the room, then calmly said, "Your father requested that we ignore your grandfather's final instructions." The room instantly fell silent. Dad's face lost all color. Benjamin continued, "Fortunately, I follow my client's wishes." He placed one hand on the envelope, then looked directly at my parents. "Before I read the will, there is one final letter, written specifically for this moment." No one moved. No one spoke. Even Emily's confident smile disappeared. Benjamin slowly broke the wax seal, and the very first sentence made my mother burst into tears.